Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem. I'm with IFAS Extension, Nassau County. I'm the County Extension Director, the Horticulture Agent, Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator. But the biggest thing is, as part of Extension program, we're loving to share all this information, science-based research with everybody in the community, because what we love to do is share this research with you so you can learn about these skills and this knowledge about being able to manage, in this case, citrus in your landscape, because then you can help share that information with some of your neighbors, and then you can connect them to Extension. But I'm really excited that you all are joining us. You all should be able to see the PowerPoint now. But anyways, welcome. And I want to kick us off because I know more have joined us. We were talking about beforehand, but what kind of citrus do you have in your landscapes? I know some have mentioned that they have Meyer lemons, different types of oranges. What are some other things that, if you haven't responded yet, do you have citrus? Or if you don't, what is some of the citrus that you're interested in growing at your home? And I'll take a few minutes we can wait and see some of those responses. So, ooh, satsumas, yeah. Calamondin, Calamenden. I've heard some people pronounce them differently, but those are tasty. I know some people that make preserves out of calamenden, and it is so yummy. Oh, a lime, oranges, ponderosa lemon, kumquats. Yay. I think I want to plant the calamenden tree. Ooh, it's not citrus, but olives. Yes, olives. Olives are yummy, and they're pretty easy to grow in well-drained soils. Well, wonderful. That's some really good feedback. I know earlier there was some different types of mandarins, different types of limes, Hamlin oranges, which are always delicious. Then we have like the specialty types like lime quats, kumquats. So, excuse me. So I'm excited to be able to share this information. So there's one comment said they would like to grow lemon. And of course, lemons can be kind of tricky in this area because of cold tolerance with a lot of our lemons and limes, but our Meyer lemon is a great example of one that does really well. Ponderosa lemon can do well too. Most lemons and limes, if you want to grow them, I actually recommend, rather than in ground, put them in a container so then you can wheel them inside or bring them into protection when we get cold. But also the comment is a fruit cocktail tree. Yes, I don't know if I've ever seen one of those before in person. Maybe we'll try to grow one at the extension office. Maybe we'll graft different citrus together with approved scions. So that would be kind of fun. But anyways, so let's go ahead and get going. Thanks for sharing with all that. That's a lot of really cool information and ideas. So as part of all my programs, I always like to share with everybody these essential questions. My goal is at the end of the program today, you'll be able to answer these 2 essential questions. And excuse me, you should be able to answer these essential questions and feel more confident, or at least you know how to find that information to help you have those informed decisions when you're managing your citrus in your landscapes. So those 2 essential questions that we have today is, what are the best management recommendations for managing citrus at home, as well as which citrus varieties are recommended for home. So there's dozens of citrus varieties that we can have. I mean, you all mentioned them here. But what I kind of did as part of our presentation today is I narrowed it down. Specifically, there's no limit really to how different types of citrus you want to try, but I narrowed it down to something I know do really well because of our cold temperatures. Now, if we live down in Orlando and south, we can grow any type of citrus we wanted, and we could be producing citrus year round in our landscapes. We can still do that here, but our trees are more susceptible to freeze damage. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So those varieties I limited to which ones do well in this area. And obviously, those best management practices, that's learning how to plant, water, fertilize, nutrient management, is essential in making sure that we're managing our citrus trees well. So a lot of these recommendations, it's just citrus trees. It's not necessarily orange, lemons, limes. It is citrus trees. So there are some slight variations that may occur, but a lot of the information that we share here today is based off of just generalized citrus management recommendations. So as part of that citrus management, we're going to dive into 7 kind of key parts. And what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about this today, but I'm also going to share with you different resources from the university that goes over all this information in even more detail. And once you have that link and you know how to find it, it's really easy and a great tool to have at your fingertips. But anyway, so let's keep going. We're going to talk about tree selection and site conditions. So what are those things that we need to consider when planting our citrus trees? Next is planting and establishment, pruning, nutrient requirements, water requirements, harvest. How do we know when to harvest citrus? And then we'll talk about the common citrus problems. Not all the citrus problems, but the common ones. And these are the common ones when homeowners reach out to our extension office. These are the big ones that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but there's still a bunch of other fungus and diseases that we don't talk about in this program. But again, I will share a lot of that information with you. And then if anything ever pops up that's strange in your citrus that you don't recognize, you can reach out to our county extension office. But anyway, so let's go ahead and just jump right in and keep going. So let's talk about tree selection. You know, whenever thinking about trees, citrus trees, I always like to say to people like, well, what do you like to eat? What do you want? You know, don't plant a lemon tree unless you want to use lemons. Don't plant a lime tree unless you have limes that you want to use for a purpose. You know, citrus, grapefruit. You know, I don't like grapefruit. Of course, I haven't had one in a bit, but I have never been a big fan of grapefruit, so I don't think I'd put grapefruit in my yard. But my goodness, I love those hybrid types of citrus, like mandarins, the satsumas, hamlins. Oh, so yummy. So it's really ultimately, what do you like to eat? Because citrus, they can produce, and some of them will produce a lot. So what do you like to eat? Think about that, but then also think about freeze sensitivity. It's really important for us to think about that in North Florida, especially we see it more so on the west side of the county than we do on the east side, but regardless, it doesn't matter because in Nassau County, we're still going to get those frost and freezes. Predominantly freezes, because that's going to actually impact our trees significantly. And the freezes can actually kill the blossoms, kill the blooms, it can kill the fruit before they develop. And then all of a sudden, you know, you have twig damage on your trees. There's a lot of issues. So whenever you're looking at plant selection or citrus selection, it's really important that we think about the freeze tolerance. So when we're talking about varieties today, I am going to be focusing specifically on the ones that should do well here. But again, you know, if you put something in a big pot or container, you can theoretically grow whichever citrus is because you can bring it in for protection. But also think about there are specific citrus that do have cross-pollination requirements. So majority, I don't want to say majority, but a lot of our citrus are self-pollinating. So you can plant one in your yard and it'll generate fruit. But there are some other really good varieties that grow well here that will require specific other citrus trees in your landscape, or at least close by, that in order for them to produce. It was a few months ago, I was talking to someone, they had an issue where their citrus tree the previous year wasn't producing. And because of the citrus tree that they had, I said, do you have these other trees in your property? And they said, well, they took down one because it was sick. They just haven't replaced it yet. And I was like, well, that's the reason, because that citrus tree required a pollinator with it, another tree. So without that, that tree is unable to fruit. So it's important to consider that. And we'll talk some of the varieties that I have on here are going to be self-pollinating, but I do have a really good one that requires some other trees in your yard. So that's important, because if you have enough space for just one citrus tree, you need something that's self-pollinating. But if you have plenty of space, you can play around with the different varieties that you can put. And then also it's important to think about pest protection. Some citrus trees are susceptible to different funguses or pests. And it's just a matter of balance of knowing what are they susceptible for, and how to just keep an eye on it. One of the pests that we're going to talk about as part of our presentation for citrus problems is the citrus psyllid, and its relation to citrus greening, because we are developing different varieties of citrus that is resistant or tolerant. I don't want to say resistant, is tolerant of citrus greening. So we'll talk more about that. And again, the information that I'm going to share with you all, actually it'll list a bunch of different citrus trees, and it'll talk about cross-pollination. It'll talk about sensitivity to freezing, and you can talk about like when those fruits mature, so you can make sure you harvest them before freezing can impact your citrus. But anyways, so that's an important part about tree selection and site conditions. And I do know that one person mentioned already in the chat box that, you know, our soils are really, really important. Let me go back. Oh yeah, here's the site conditions. Our soils are really, really important when putting in citrus trees. So it's kind of strange, but a general rule of thumb, citrus trees do really like well-drained soils. So if you're on a property that, you know, a new home development, a lot of time is really just sand as a foundation, where the house has been built up and then built on sand. So usually for most homes, we actually have already really pretty decent drainage, or we have spots that are that have good drainage on our property. Citrus trees do need full sun to part shade. They do best in complete full sun. That's where you're gonna have the most productivity, but you can have a citrus tree in part shade and it'll do fantastic. I've seen citrus growing wonderfully underneath the oak of underneath the canopy of an oak. Oh, and one good question that popped up, if we have a self-pollinator and a cross-pollinator in the yard, will the cross-pollinator's needs be met? It depends on the variety, but yes. A lot of times it's just you need to have two citrus, but sometimes there are some trees that require specific, very specific citrus for it to be successful in pollination. So sorry, I want to jump back to that because I saw that pop up. So going back to site conditions, well-drained soils, full sun to part shade. Because of the size of mature trees, you want to make sure that you're not creating unnecessary places where shade is created. So try to make sure you space 15 feet between trees, because as those trees mature, you don't want the shadow or the shade of that tree to eliminate or create shade on the lower parts of the canopies of surrounding trees, which can impact production. But also think about shade from buildings, trees, and make sure you avoid any type of septic drain field. As well, citrus prefers a slightly acidic soil pH of 5.5 to 6.5. If you're outside of that soil pH, we do have ways that we can still manage citrus successfully, just that is the most ideal. So if you're interested in getting your soil pH, you can always do a soil test with the University of Florida within our extension office. You can reach out to us. We do free pH tests within our office, but you can get more precise nutrient testing done at our soils labs on campus, and we can talk to you how to submit those samples. So it's really important to think about that. But another thing that we consider is the salinity of our soils, or our salt tolerance of our citrus trees. And this is where it becomes pretty difficult, especially for homeowners, because when we purchase trees, citrus trees, they have to come from a certified stock. When I say certified stock, that means, you know, when we go to the store and buy our trees, there's actually two parts of that citrus tree. There's the root stock and then the scion. The root stock is what ends up creating the roots, and then the scion is what we graft onto the root stock, and that's what ends up growing to create the citrus that you end up eating and consuming. So as buyers for homeowners, we have to buy certified stock. So things that have already been grafted, they're already containerized, etc. And that's done, and that's actually required by law because of diseases within the citrus industry, and that process and oversight that we have for citrus production, for commercial citrus growers or even home growers is to make sure that we have certified disease-free citrus. So we don't have a big control over necessarily the rootstock, because the rootstock of our citrus is actually going to be what kind of dictates the salt tolerance of our citrus trees. So luckily though, the most common type of rootstock that is used is the sour orange rootstock. And if we look historically back to this history of citrus in Florida, the sour orange is actually one of the predominant citrus that came over with this, the Spanish into Florida originally. But it has a semi-tolerance, it's semi-tolerant to salts. So that has become kind of a general rootstock for a lot of our citrus trees. And there is a very, very, very high chance that the citrus that you buy is using that sour orange as its rootstock. So have any of you ever had an orange in your tree, a citrus tree, and then you have this amazing, delicious fruit, and then on one part of the tree, you can get an orange and you bite into it and it turns you inside out. It's so sour. Have any of you ever had that happen to you? You put that in the chat box. I'm curious, because I know some people that that's happened to before. Oh, what's this? I think I have a sour orange tree. Previous owner told me she mowed over her lemon and her lemon accidentally, and this sprung up. Beautiful tree, awful fruit. And that's exactly what it was, is that original lemon was grafted onto that sour orange rootstock. So womp, they accidentally mowed over the lemon, killed the scion, but you still had a root in the ground, and that root from that citrus tree just whoop started growing anew, and it can create fruit, and they are visually, they're juicy. They look like amazing oranges, but then yeah, you bite into it and it is sour. So that's a great example of where that has happened in the past. So let me see. I had another person say, yep, that's happened to them. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about pruning, because even if you have a really healthy tree, sometimes that rootstock will get a little bit squirrely and it'll shoot up its own trunk, and you just have to prune those out. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But if you don't catch that, you don't notice it, you'll get this lone sour orange branch growing up in your citrus tree that will produce sour oranges. So let's talk about that planting and establishment. I got to keep an eye on time because I got a lot of content to cover. So due to disease, buy only certified nursery stock. You know, there's a lot of times I know people love practicing, learning about grafting. If you're doing it for your own property, that's fine. But if you are going to buy citrus, buy it from a retailer that you know you have certified nursery stock. You know, so any nursery that's inspected by the Florida Department of Ag, which is anybody selling legally and commercially in the state, they have to have that nursery stock. You know, I can't go to my neighbor down the street and buy citrus from them, or technically I shouldn't even be taking anything as a donation, or, you know, so someone wanted to gift it to me, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend doing any type of grafting with citrus, actually. So make sure that you only have disease-free. Due to disease, buy only certified nursery stock because you know it's disease-free, and that helps prevent some of our major diseases that has really wreaked havoc on our citrus industry. When you're planting your citrus, plant at the same depth of the container wall. So I know there's always some like little variations in how we plant some of our plants. And with the trees, you're usually like the topmost root you want to have up at the surface or just above the surface. But for a general rule of thumb with citrus, wherever that top of the soil is in that container that you buy it in, that's the level that it needs to be in the ground. Don't put mulch down, keep all the ground, like the turf and weeds, away from it. And with that soil that you do, build a ring that you dig up, build a ring around the citrus tree that acts like a big bowl, because you can fill that up with water. And what that'll do is that can help soak into the roots, especially during the infancy period of a tree after planting, because that's when it really needs to develop those roots. Great question. Do we add any additives, black cow fertilizer? Nope, nothing. Just use undisturbed soil and just that natural, whatever you dig out, just use that as your backfill, come back in. And the reason that we don't do that is actually when we put anything that has a high nitrogen within that backfill, those roots haven't developed and grown into there yet. So you're actually losing a lot of those nutrients and they're not available to the plant yet. And this is in general for most plants, this rule. And the concern is if you, after you plant it, it's going to want to shoot out fresh young roots, and they're more susceptible to nitrogen burn. So if there's a high level of nitrogen in that soil, that backfill that you put in, that can actually burn the roots and make it harder for that tree to establish and could cause some issues down the road. So right before you put it in the ground, you know, I always like to say you shave the ball. So remove all the way around that mass of soil that was in the container, just the edge of it, kind of like prunes all the roots at the end to encourage new growth. Do it on the sides and the bottom. So we call it shaving the ball before you plant it. So, but just make sure there's no mulch or grass under the canopy. If you're unable to do that, just make sure nothing is touching the trunk, because in citrus that can lead to different types of what we call foot rot. So it's fungal diseases that can end up killing your tree. So try to avoid anything being up against the trunk, or at minimum, but try to keep it completely clear under the canopy. So when we talk about pruning, the best thing for citrus is to actually not prune at all. Excessive pruning limits fruit production. So when we think about pruning, there are situations that, yes, we need to make sure that we do prune to remove to help the tree with its overall health and to help with the overall quality of the fruit that comes from the tree. So it's important, you know, we're talking about the rootstock earlier that kind of wiggles up. We call those suckers. So prune suckers, any sucker that comes up down at the base of the tree, prune it. Because what's happening is that's going to be your sour orange, or it's going to be your rootstock. And that growth is just going to pull the nutrients away from the rest of the tree and pulling it from fruit production or that healthy growth that you want with the tree. So prune suckers, and then also prune sprouts. It's kind of similar to a sucker, but you're seeing it on the branches. You've probably seen them in some of your citrus before, where they're just little branches that all of a sudden just whoop, go straight up. They are not going to be, those sprouts, same thing, they're going to take away nutrients, and they're going to impact the quality of the tree. They don't provide anything, so just prune those out. So the suckers, the sprouts, and then remove any weak, dead, dying, or diseased branches. And it's important that anytime you're doing any type of planting, or sorry, management, and you're pruning anything in your landscape, it's important to try to sanitize your pruning shears so you don't unintentionally spread a disease to different parts of the tree, because a lot of our diseases, they are spread by insects, but they're also spread by us because we're not sanitizing in between treatments. So with regards to pruning, they're pretty hands-off. No sucker, remove suckers, remove those sprouts, remove weak, dead, dying, or diseased branches. And the nice thing, when to prune, because it's an evergreen, I usually recommend just wait until after the fruiting period. But if it is a sucker or a sprout, you can remove it at any time. So it's unlike the some of our deciduous trees, like once they drop their leaves, that's going to be the best time to prune them. But because they're evergreen, the citrus, you can technically prune them at any time. But for major, if you have to do some big pruning on a tree, I would recommend wait until after the fruiting, because that does impact that is stressful for the tree. But at any time you see suckers or sprouts, I would recommend just prune them out if they're cuts here and there. You can do that at any time. So I did have a question that had to do with the pruning the roots, essentially, when we're planting them. It said, are circling roots ever an issue when planting potted citrus into the ground? Yes. So when I talked about, because when you remove a citrus tree from a container to put in your ground, there is a chance that that citrus tree is not in a big enough pot. So the roots start to grow in a circle around itself. And what that does is that creates root bounds, and that can essentially, that will choke the tree, ends up choking itself. So it's root girdling is the term that we use. So when we go to remove that pot, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, that tree, you shave that root ball because what that does is that helps with that circling roots of the tree. And when I mentioned sanitizer, you can use like isopropyl alcohol, a bleach water solution to kind of just wipe your blades in between each cut. So, okay, I had a couple questions come in. So this question says, my tree has excessive sticks like poking out. Someone told me that was a blight last year. They are all over the top areas of the tree, just dead sticks. When should I prune those? Any specific time of years? You can prune those. You can prune those right now if they're fruiting right now, but there wasn't a blight. If a disease is a disease, it doesn't really come in annual cycles. Whenever we just have diseases. So what's happening is you're actually having twig dieback, and twig dieback can be result of many different things. It can be a result to root problems. It can be result to freeze damage. And there's a really good chance that it could be a result of freeze damage. But there's a lot of different reasons that you can have that stick and twig dieback. And you can see that a lot in the canopy of the tree. So I would go ahead and prune those out, especially if they're dead wood. It's not going to impact the tree. Great question. So, all right. And I will have these pages available. I'll send out a copy to everybody. So now let's talk about nutrient management. This is going to be important because nutrient management changes year to year. And the first year is going to be really, really important. The first year from planting is going to be really, really important to make sure you have a strong citrus tree that gets established, and then looking how that changes throughout the years as it grows. So the first one, let's just talk about year one, because year one is the kind of like the year that changes. As you add nutrients, the amount that you have to add increases slightly throughout the year. So at year one, when to fertilize, we say bud swelling, or 3 weeks after planting. So bud swelling is typically related to fruit development, but 3 weeks after planting, that's going to be the best time that you can fertilize. So if you wanted to go ahead and you can plant your citrus right now, and then you can start your nutrient management in February. And what you do is you can start doing your nutrient management, go February to October, and you do about every 6 weeks, you do an application. And I recommend just getting a citrus fertilizer for your trees because it has, it's formulated for the nutrients that your citrus trees will need. And start off with just a half cup for your first application. And then slowly increase it throughout the year. And around the time you get to your last application in September or October, you should be doing about 24 ounces or a pint and a half. So a pint glass, just regular like 16-ounce pint glass, if you have one at your house, that's actually a good measuring tool for your citrus trees because 1 pound of fertilizer is that 16 fluid ounces. It's really close to it. But if you got like a 1 pound bag of coffee, that ends up being like 3.5 pounds of fertilizer. So use just a pint glass for measuring all your citrus fertilizer for the year. It's easy to do, and they're easy to find if you don't have one. So you start off with a half cup during that first application, and every 6 weeks you just increase it a little bit, and then you end with that last application for the year about 24 ounces or a pint and a half in September. And that's that first year. And what's happening is it's because the roots aren't developed yet. the nutrients are based off of the development of the roots. So we have a very, very small, like the roots aren't too developed. So you're not going to put a bunch of fertilizer down. So that first time that you put down fertilizer, you're just going to kind of put it on that root ball, just sprinkle it around that root ball. Don't let it touch the trunk of the tree. Just sprinkle it around that root ball. And then as that tree ages, so in like the subsequent years, you spread your fertilizer based off of like a little bit beyond the canopy of the tree. That's a pretty easy rule of thumb. But as the tree's roots grow, you need to put down more nutrients for the tree, as well as, excuse me, you put down more nutrients for the tree in higher amounts because you have a much larger root system, but you can put it down less frequent because you're able to put down more. So the good question is, I had a good question came. It says, my soil has been tested and is very high in phosphorus. Is the balanced fertilizer still advised? So if you do a soil test and you have a high phosphorus, there is no need to put down phosphorus fertilizer. That is a rule of thumb for our landscape plants. Citrus is an exception to that rule because citrus is a high consumer of phosphorus. So it is common that if you do not put phosphorus down, that tree will show signs of a phosphorus deficiency. But nonetheless, if you want to do a nitrogen and potassium only fertilizer and then come back with just a micronutrient application, you can do that, no problem. And yes, you do not, the timing for all of this is during that, for all fertilizer is going to be kind of February to October. Let me see if I have, yeah, I still have some notes there. Okay, so yeah, so the main growing season where the plants are going to be using a lot of those nutrients, it's going to be that February to October period. So that first year is going to be really, really important. There's not going to be too much of a benefit of fertilizing your citrus tree now. I would wait until next month. So right now is a great time to plant new citrus. But then looking at the subsequent years in that table below, you can see that based off of the year, how long that tree has been in the ground, how many applications you'll be, and the pounds of nitrogen per tree per year, not necessarily your fertilizer, but the nitrogen needed to put in the ground. But then I really like the pounds of fertilizer per tree per application table, because fertilizer and nutrients come in a bunch of different ratios. Like you can get something at 666, 888, 10, 10, 10, or 606 if you, but the citrus fertilizers are usually gonna come in 6 or 8. That first number is nitrogen. So you can see that the pounds of fertilizer needed per tree per application is in that table. And you can definitely see that the frequency is much higher for the younger trees, but you're putting down much less per application. But if you jump to like that 5th year and higher, you can see that you're only putting it down, or sorry, that 4th year, you're putting down, and 5th year and above, you're putting down 3 applications a year, but you can see that at least you're putting down much higher amounts of that fertilizer per application. And this is a great example to kind of show why it's important that you can just use a pint glass, or if you do have a scale that you can use to measure the weight of the fertilizer, that allows you to determine how much of that fertilizer you need to put down for those trees. If you have a bunch of citrus trees, it may not be 100% economical just to get those bags of citrus fertilizer, because they're usually in smaller bags. And if you have a bunch, you're going to fly through those bags pretty quickly. So you might have to get just general purpose fertilizer, and then you might have to amend with some micronutrients, which we'll talk about here in a second. Oh, and an important thing is that a lot of you may have trees that have already been in the ground for that 4th, 5th, and beyond year. So we're doing those 3 times a month. I always remember, or 3 times for the growing season, I always just do 3, 6, 9. That's when I remember when to fertilize my trees if they're that fourth and higher. March, June, September, 3, 6, 9. And that just allows me to remember when to fertilize for those. So let's talk about the need for micronutrients on trees. A lot of that granular fertilizer that you get is for citrus trees. It's formulated with citrus trees, and it has a lot of those micronutrients like zinc. It can have sulfur. There's a few more that you can find in there, and they're listed at a rate that is going to be needed for citrus trees to be most productive. But there are other ways that we still recommend trying to get some micronutrients on the tree. You can actually get a foliar citrus spray, just a liquid spray that you put on the leaves of the tree. If your ideal pH, you don't have to do it. But if you have a higher pH, you want to at minimum do it once a year. But if you apply at least once a year, but if you do have a tree that ends up testing positive for citrus greening or susceptible to citrus greening, or you think it has it, you actually just do that application, that citrus foliar spray 3 times a year rather than just once. And that would just be for anybody, not if you have a high pH or not. And what that does is we found that any trees that have citrus greening, that if you triple the amount of micronutrients compared to our traditional recommendations, that the trees are still able to be productive. And it's an easy recommendation for homeowners to be able to do. There's some further research that's being done to help with citrus trees with citrus greening, but it's not necessarily a homeowner recommendation. It's something that's more on the commercial level. But the citrus foliar spray you can find online, you can find at ag supply stores. And another thing that you need to think about is iron deficiencies. There are iron deficiencies that you can get, especially if you have a high pH. So you can get chelated iron, and that's actually, you can find that at any big box store, any ag supply store. It's very common. And you just apply that once a year, typically in the summer, the heat of the summer. That's where you're going to put that down. But a neat thing is, and I'll share that document with you, you can actually look at your leaves and your fruits, and you can actually determine what your nutrient deficiencies are. Like in the example that we see right here, that's actually a zinc deficiency in citrus. So I'll share that document with you because they can actually, it shows pictures of the deficiencies, and it kind of describes what you can, other things that you can see as part of those deficiencies in your citrus trees. So now let's talk about water requirements. So those water requirements, one of the common issues that I do see in citrus is that we are overwatering trees, and that can have an impact on the health and production of them. So we think again about that initial planting, establishment, and then afterwards. So you've already planted your tree. You have that little ring of soil built around the tree. It's like a bowl. And after you plant that, twice a week, if you can run a hose to it, you just run a hose for about 10-15 minutes in that basin twice a week for a month. If a hose is unavailable, you can literally just get 8 to 10 gallons of water and just fill that basin that you built, and do that a couple times a week for that first month. So because the goal is just get a lot of water onto that plant at first, but then afterwards, it's just going to be more let that tree tell you when it needs water. Because you prefer to have trees that kind of be right on that edge of drought, because it's going to actually promote root growth. If you have healthier roots with your citrus trees, or all plants, not just your citrus, you're going to have a healthier plant. So what you want to do is you do that first application for that first month after planting, and then just do visual inspections. Let the tree tell you when it needs water. So look at that new growth, because that's where we see it the most. So this is the newest, youngest leaves on the tree. And if you notice that they start to look a little unhappy in the heat of the day, that's a good indicator that they need water. But you'll notice that as they're young trees, you'll see that demand happen more often. But once the tree gets older, that demand starts to wane back. And you're going to realize that you're not going to, as the tree gets older, it won't need as much water. It'll need a lot of water, but the frequency significantly decreases. So let the tree tell you when it's thirsty. Don't just put it on a schedule. and it ends up getting just too much water, because that can end up being way worse for your plants. And I have this image here because there's a bunch of different ways in the commercial industry that they do irrigate their citrus. And I really like this one because this is literally just a little microjet that's on a citrus tree. Now they're having to run that microjet for a long time in order to get the amount of water down because of the gallons per minute that they put out. But nonetheless, that shows that a micro irrigation is an acceptable irrigation strategy for citrus trees. So let the tree tell you when it's thirsty. So you're looking for those new growths to wilt in the heat of the day. When you're noticing that they're wilting, that's when you need to water it. If it's not wilting, let the tree be. The tree's happy and healthy, because a lot of our citrus trees are also susceptible to foot rot, or rot that happens within the roots. So if we end up putting too much moisture, those roots can rot, and that can lead to twig dieback up in that canopy, kind of what we mentioned earlier, because sometimes citrus trees will actually kill the branches in the canopy because the root system is shrinking or being damaged. The trees will purposely, if there's damage on the roots and they shrink, they will shrink their canopy to match their roots. So making sure that we're not over irrigating, because that can lead to root damage and rot. So helps protect the tree and the quality of the fruit. So next, let's talk about harvest. The neat thing about citrus is just keep them on the tree. You don't have to pick them. Citrus can actually sit on the tree for up to 3 months. And the longer it sits on the tree, the sweeter it becomes. The only time that we really need to say, hey, I need to go out and pick my citrus tree, is because a cold or a freeze snap is coming in. If there's freeze going to come in, that can cause that citrus to fall. So at that point, it could be worth harvesting them. But if we don't have a freeze coming in, just keep them on the tree. They store better on the tree than they do inside your home. So only pick them when you're ready to eat. Keeping the fruit on the tree is best. More time on tree, the sweeter the fruit. And also, if you're washing the fruit, wash only before you eat. Not when you bring them inside, but only when you're going to eat that specific citrus. Because citrus have a protective wax coating on them that help preserve them. And the minute we remove them, it makes them susceptible to, they end up just rotting, and etc. And also, it's important to note that I know sometimes we'll pick like tomatoes, you can put them in the window and they ripen. And citrus, when you pick them, they stop ripening. So the state that you pick them in, they're not going to change much at all from that point. So you know when the fruit is ready, when you look at it and say, hey, that looks like I could eat that right now. If it looks like how you would want to buy it in a store, it is ready to get picked. So it's usually more of just, if that looks yummy and tasty, it's ready to go. So that's when you know it's ready to eat. And if you see that it's ready to go and you don't need to eat it yet, just let it sit. Let it sit on the tree, because that fruit will hold and store much better in the long run. So now let's talk quickly about some of the citrus problems that we can see, because we are running out of time, but I want to make sure that we have time, because I do want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. So some of share this publication with you as well. This is the common citrus problems. So it has disorders and different disease and pests and nutrient deficiencies that we can see at our home landscapes. But some of the ones that I kind of want to briefly talk about is freeze damage, fruit drop, and yellow vein chlorosis. But then some of the diseases and pests that we can see. Predominantly, the diseases and pests are going to be the big ones that we see on our citrus. Let's talk a little about freeze damage. So freeze damage, it's really hard to see exactly. But we do know that if we have bad freezes come in, those younger branches on the trees are going to be damaged. And what they can do is they can damage the fruit, they can damage the leaves, it can cause twig and branch dieback in the canopy. So a lot of times it's important for us to think about what's causing, let me take a step back. I'm jumping ahead of myself. So with that freeze damage, we want to think, oh, there's damage, I want to prune it out. When there is freeze damage or susceptible or suspicious that there could be freeze damage, wait until the spring. Don't prune it. If you think there's freeze damage, wait until later, because it won't be evident of the true extent of the freeze damage until way beyond those freezes have existed. And then you prune back to healthy branches. So that's important for freeze damage. And it's just a matter of keeping an eye. It's like, oh, we have a big freeze come in. These plants aren't tolerant to freezes. So you just have to be wary that there's going to be freeze damage. And sometimes you can actually see that damage on the leaves and the fruit if they're there. But you won't know the full extent until springtime. Fruit drop. Fruit drop is, it can be caused by different reasons. And that happens is I'll have people call and say, oh, my fruit is dropping. And there's different reasons that can lead to fruit drop. It can be freeze related. It can be moisture related. It can be nutrient related. So usually fruit drop is an indicator that there is something happening with the tree and the tree is not happy. And that can be at any time of the fruit. That can be when it's flowering or just after flowering, so we call post-bloom fruit drop. So once the flowers are pollinated and they begin to develop that fruit, anytime that fruit can fall off, and that can be a result of something that's happening in the landscape that's making that tree unhappy. So we can use that as an indicator to say, what's happening in the landscape? Am I managing it correctly? Is it getting pollinated? It allows us to think, okay, here's an indicator that something could be wrong. Let me review what my management practices are to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. And then yellow vein chlorosis, that's kind of just I should have grabbed a picture for that one. Let me see if I can open up this document real fast so I can show you. So that relates to root bound. It looks like a nutrient deficiency, but in actuality, let me switch to this real quick. It looks like a nutrient deficiency, but what it is telling us is, let me find picture. So that's what it looks like. You have these yellow veins. You all can see this, correct? I think I did a correct screen share. Okay, great. So this looks like a nutrient deficiency, but you can see how the midrib of these leaves are yellow where the rest is green. That is an indicator. That is an indicator that you actually have root-bound citrus, that there is an issue with the roots of the tree. It looks like a nutrient deficiency, but that yellow vein chlorosis, that's the leaves telling you that my roots are unhappy, and it could be root-bound. So that's important to consider. And if that ends up becoming the case, reach out to me and we can talk about what do we need to do, because it could be root-bound, it could be a root disease, and trying to determine what is causing that to happen in the first place, because it has very specific recommendations based off of that treatment or what that diagnostics is. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so the diseases and pests. So citrus insects and sooty mold, citrus greening, and the citrus psyllid. So let's talk about some of these things. So like here's an example. This is a citrus leaf miner. Have any of you seen this on your citrus trees before? I would almost say that if you have a citrus tree, you're gonna have a citrus leaf miner. These are so common. It's a matter of like, will I have it on one leaf? Will I have it on every single leaf on my citrus tree? So what happens, it's just a moth. The adult comes in and lays its eggs either on it's like within the epidermis of the leaf. So it's actually within the leaf, and the egg hatches, and it's a little caterpillar that actually creates this serpentine, like twisty trail inside the leaf of your citrus. And usually we're seeing this, if you have leaves that are curled up, it's because of this. Then you can just inspect the leaf and you can see this little twisty serpentine trail that kind of goes around. And that little brown line that's running through that serpentine trail, that's actually the frass, that's the poop of the leaf miner. And then you can see in this arrow, it's pointing to what ends up happening is the caterpillar will come out, and it actually, you'll see it on the leaves, it curls over, the leaf will curl over the caterpillar as it makes its cocoon, and it sits there until it pupates and becomes an adult. Um, so it's kind of a neat little thing, and you will find this on your trees. A thing about citrus leaf miner is they can be problematic if there is just an exorbitant amount of them on your trees. Our actually biggest concern is because they create entry and exit points on the leaves, which can then be entry points for diseases like citrus canker, which is a really bad disease that impacts our citrus trees. So it's important to think about that when you are looking at your leaves. So there's not too many ways that you can directly manage this this leaf miner on the plant. But a nice thing is, if you notice that the citrus leaf miners are isolated to one part of your tree, you just prune that part of the tree out, and then they're managed. For a majority of our other insects that we could have with our tree, it's just a management of, you can mechanically remove them, squish them, pinch them, prune out pieces. But horticultural oils and copper fungicide sprays pretty much manage majority of all of our issues that homeowners deal with our citrus trees. So this is one, I get calls about this all the time. This is a super common. Of course, this is citrus, sorry. So when looking at this, how many of you seen this on your plants before? Yeah, it's like, I have. Yep, exactly. Yep. So I get calls all the time. This is a common thing. It's like, hey, Taylor, I got this weird black stuff growing on my plants. This is actually not a problem. It's an indicator that there is an insect problem. This is sooty mold. And sooty mold actually grows on insect honeydew. And honeydew is the correct way of saying, the nice way of saying poop. Like aphids, scale, psyllids, their poop falls onto the leaves, and then the sooty mold grows on it. So usually when we're seeing sooty mold on plants, it's not really causing any issues to the plants. What we're seeing is, oh, there's actually an insect that's causing a problem to this tree, or have an insect problem. And this isn't just citrus trees. This is all ornamental plants, any tree. So it doesn't hurt the plant, but just means there's an insect problem that might need to be managed. And typically with citrus trees, we're seeing it with aphids. Aphids is the most common problem with citrus. We don't have too many scale that impacts citrus, but they will cause it, but the psyllids as well will cause it. So the aphids, we just have brown aphids. There's a few other types of aphids that we can have on our citrus trees. But the brown aphid actually spreads a virus that is pretty problematic for our citrus. And we're going to see aphids on the new growth of trees where it's more succulent, that allows them to actually eat it. You're not going to see aphids on older leaves. So if you see sooty mold, look up and look for all these little insects. And it could be as easy as just pruning out that chunk of that branch, and that controls that aphid problem. The other one that we'll see is the citrus psyllid. So the citrus psyllid, I've seen these in Nassau County. One time I was at a site visit because someone was concerned they had citrus greening on their trees, and I found the citrus psyllid. I was like, well, yep, this looks like citrus greening. And we found the citrus psyllid, and a citrus psyllid actually spreads citrus greening. It's a tiny little insect, but you can see it with your eye, no problem. And when it's on your leaf, it kind of sits straight up on the leaf, like you can see in this image, like it's doing a headstand. That's an easy way that you can recognize it. They're tiny, but you can definitely see them. And it is the vector of citrus greening. And citrus greening is the disease that's been going through the state. It's a bacteria that has essentially it renders citrus trees unproductive, and there's no cure for it. There's a bunch of research trying to learn more about it and trying to come up with cures or ways to manage the disease. It has been detrimental to our citrus industry. there's always the silver lining. When HLB or citrus greening first showed up in Florida, people were saying that's the end of the citrus industry in the state. But luckily, we've learned management and we still have a very strong citrus industry, which has been really, really good. But we see this in our yards. And there's ways that we can look for it. You can look at your leads and you can actually see like nutrient deficiencies are symmetrical around the midrib of the leaf right here. But if it is citrus greening, the pattern is not symmetrical about the leaf. So what I always sometimes do is we do a pin test, is I'll draw a circle here and I'll draw a circle here. And I'll say, oh, that pattern is not the same. There's a nutrient deficiency, it would be the same. If it's HLB or greening, it's asymmetrical, so it won't be the same. So we call that just the pin test, and that's a very strong visual indicator that you have positive citrus greening. Our old recommendation is if you have citrus greening is you actually just remove the tree. But now we have learned that we do have some resistant or tolerant varieties. You can remove the tree if you want to prevent that spread to your other citrus if you have it on the property, but also another alternative is doing those applications of the nutrient spray 3 times a year. So I'll send out this publication. It has more information on greening or nutrient deficiency. So anyway, so those are a lot of the citrus problems, the common ones that we see. It's not the exclusive ones, but those are the very common ones that when people reach out to our office, those are the diseases and issues and problems that we see. At the end, we'll have a little bit of time to talk about some other problems, but you can always reach out to me for specific problems that you have you need help on. So let's talk about the citrus varieties, because I know this is like one of the things that we want to talk about is like what can grow here. I know you all mentioned a bunch of really great things earlier. So let's go through these to talk about them. There's different like classifications of citrus that we have. We have like the sweet oranges, grapefruits, the acid type citrus, and then specialty citrus. So specialty citrus end up being kind of like the really cool hybridizations of different types of citrus. So let's talk about some of the sweet oranges. And a lot of these are picked because they do well with our cold temperatures. They're more tolerant, or by the time they're fruiting, they are developing their fruit is the 4-hour freezes. So the common sweet orange varieties that you can grow here are Navel, Hamlin, and Valencia. And a navel orange we actually call and that's what you see in this image. That's actually what we call a shy bearer. So it can be kind of sparse. You can have some years where it's like, woo, here's a bunch of fruit, and not as much this year. I'll give you a few. They kind of be inconsistent, but they're shy bearers. They are susceptible to fruit drop, especially with the freezes. And the neat thing is they're seedless varieties. So that's a really cool benefit of the navel. And I don't have the harvest season. The harvest season is in October to January. So for North Florida, those early seasons where we're seeing fruiting, that October to January is really neat because we're able to start harvesting fruit before we have those freezes come in, which could damage the fruit. The Hamlin is another good option. The October to January season, it can have fruit drop in late season, like that January period. And the neat thing is the Valencia. The Valencia we can plant here, and it will do well, but it's a very late season in citrus. So you can actually harvest citrus March through June. And it is susceptible to post-bloom fruit drop. So sometimes we'll see those issues if we have really bad freezes come in, but a Valencia has the ability to give you late season fruit, and you have not as much of a concern about freeze damaging the maturation of that fruit. So it kind of gives us an opportunity to have late season fruit. So grapefruits, the Duncan grapefruit, I mean, you put one grapefruit in your yard, you have more than enough grapefruit. They have a much longer fruiting period. So the Duncan, you can see November through May. That's its fruiting season. That'll keep producing fruit, which is really, really cool. All of our grapefruits are susceptible to fungal pathogens. So that's something you can't necessarily avoid. We also have, if you like with traditional like I don't want to say traditional, but if you like those red flesh type grapefruits, we do have like a red blush, ruby red that you can do here. And again, its season is November to May. If you eat grapefruit all the time, you know, you can plant two, one of each. If you're like, I like grapefruit, but I don't want to have a bunch, you probably one will help. One will be sufficient. So there is one question asked, can newspaper help to protect from the killing frost? No, not necessarily, because our concern with the frost is going to be in the canopy. It's not going to be the roots. The roots are going to be fine. It's going to be that canopy is where we're going to have a lot of that frost damage. So depending on the size of the tree, you can easily cover your tree to help protect it. Larger trees, you might not be able to get a frost cloth big enough, or it'd just be hard to get on top of it. So we do, oh, that's a bad picture. That's a calamondin. Our acids that we can grow here, that includes like the Meyer lemon. It is self-pollinating, which is really, really cool. That's why you can put them in containers and have one, and you can have good fruit throughout the year. And yeah, it is throughout the year. It does fruit pretty consistently. You can have some down periods, but you can have it be very productive self-pollinating citrus. But the calamondin, that's one that I really like. It has smaller fruits. It's like 2 inches, 1 to 2 inches. But it's a cross between a mandarin and a kumquat. And it fruits November to April. And in some situations, you'll even see it go longer. I know some people that they too can have it produce almost year round. Usually during our cool times of the season or hot time of the year, that's when it's more iffy. So it depends on the seasonality and what our temperatures are like, I believe. So loquats, yes, they are technically citrus, yes. Kumquats, they are common ones. November to April is their season. Some of our specialty citrus, like satsuma, it's self-fruiting, self-pollinating, and is susceptible to a couple diseases like scab and alternaria, which are different types of fungal pathogens, bacteria pathogens. But satsumas, you know, there's a bunch of different varieties, but they do wonderful in the cold. If we had major frost come throughout North Florida, we'll see that the satsumas are faring the best. Another great one that I know are super tasty is the Mineola tangelo or the honeybell. They're easy to grow, they're easy to manage. And I know I don't like grapefruit, but I do like the tangelos because they're a cool cross between a grapefruit and a tangerine. But it does require a pollinator, and that pollinator requirement is like a temple or a sunburst. So that's the pollinator that it's very specific for it to have, and those are different types of these specialty citrus. And then the image that you see here, this is actually a sugar bell. It's a greening resistant or that greening tolerant variety of citrus, and they are super, super tasty. One fruit that I do not have on here is the one is called a gator bite that's in development right now. It'll still be 5 years or so before you see it on the market. But there are these greening tolerant resistant little, you know, you go to the store and you get those tiny little mandarin origins that are the cuties. These are Florida's response to California's cuties. They're called gator bites, and they're actually, I've had them, but the taste testing that's been done on them are coming back very, very positive. So look for gator bites coming to stores within commercial to be able to buy, probably within 5 years, but seeing them in store, it could be maybe even upwards of 10 years. But it's going to be a cool little fruit that we have coming out. So let's jump back into the essential questions because we have gone beyond our time. Citrus is easy to do that. So the essential questions is, what are the best management recommendations for managing citrus at home? So you should be more confident. The biggest things I recommend is that first year is going to be so important with watering and nutrient management. And then after that, it's just making sure you're following those nutrient management recommendations and really doing troubleshooting and regular scouting on your trees to look for problems. And then which citrus varieties are recommended for home? You can really try whatever citrus you want, but the ones that we showed here are going to be the ones that do best in our cold temperatures, especially if they're in ground. But if you have things in containers, making sure you have a nice size container is going to be really nice. But a cool thing is you can put citrus in there and you can move them in and out. Really cool example is if you look in France, they have orangeries. It's part of Renaissance, late Renaissance gardening periods. Is it late Renaissance? I can't think of it all of a sudden. But they would have just citrus trees that grow all in containers. They pull them out in the summer when it's nice, and they pull them all in the winter when it's cold. So it's an easy way to kind of help have variety of citrus and not have to be too concerned about the cold. But anyways, so let me share some of my contact information. So our office is, our main office is out in Callahan. We do have the Yulee Annex. That's in Yulee where this meeting was supposed to be today. But our main office is in Callahan. We have Master Gardener Volunteer Help Desk available on Mondays or Fridays. You know, you can always reach out to see if they're available. Fridays are in Yulee, Mondays are in Callahan, but you can always stop by our Callahan office. That's always going to be staffed. It may not be a Master Gardener, or I may not be there, but we always have people there that can help answer questions or get some of those resources to you. So feel free to reach out to us. And then here's my contact information. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We do have a YouTube page where all of our webinar recordings we upload there, so you can come back and rewatch them at another time. So anyways, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We did go over time, so I do apologize, especially if you all have things to do today. But we'll open it up a couple minutes. If you all have some questions, feel free to put those in the chat box, and I can help respond to those. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to stop share because as some of those questions start to come in, I do want to send to everybody a link. As part of our evaluations, we do this with all of our programs. It's a Qualtrics survey. It takes just a minute or so to fill out. We use that to evaluate our programs, and it's very valuable for me to help improve programs and the Master Gardeners to help improve our overall programs. So take a few minutes, and I'll follow up with that link too, so you can have access to it. So let's go ahead and answer some of the questions that I have in the chat box. So first one is, how big a pot should be used for a lemon or lime tree? So usually, like, a general rule of thumb is a minimum of a 15-inch by 15-inch container for lemons and limes. But, you know, and then you can move that around pretty easily. Those trees will want to grow, and they may need bigger pots. So it may be worth just getting a big container if you have it and using that. But the drawback is it's much heavier. So space requirements, and it's harder to move. So what variety of lime does well in our zone? I cannot remember off the top of my head, but I will double check. I don't think we have any cold tolerant limes. Any Master Gardener that's on here, feel free to shout out if you know that answer. I can't think off the top of my head, but I do not think we have any cold tolerant limes, but if you have them in containers, you can still be successful with them. Next question is, how many years after planting will fruit start? It depends. You can have some fruit start to develop within a year of planting, 2 years of planting. You have others that might take 6 years before you start to have fruit production. Part of the big, some of the big things that we need to think about that help with fruit production is root development. The plants with those the stronger, healthier roots that you get and you develop, the quicker your fruit tree will begin to bear fruit at a high production rate. But anyways, that's a really good question. So it's very variable, but you can have some development a couple of years, or it may take first year, you may take a few years before you start to see things. So next question is, should the rootstock or scion be protected from freezes? So yes, if you don't have anything in the ground, if it's not in the ground yet, yes, protect it from freezes. Keep it out of those cold winds. Don't let it get frozen. The easiest thing is just to put a drop cloth over small plants, and that should be sufficient, especially if they're in ground. If they're in container, pull them inside. That's what's going to ultimately help them out the most. It's just making sure that they don't have overexposure to that cold period. So the next question I have is there a downside to still having mature fruit on the orange trees along with new flowering, and by depriving nutrients to new flowers, hence new fruit? No, it shouldn't be an issue. So sometimes I've seen that happen where it's like I've seen citrus trees flower 3 times throughout a season before, which is kind of silly and crazy, but it shouldn't have a big impact. So, but making sure that nutrient management and following the watering recommendations, that's going to be the biggie. One question, I need to relocate some citrus that have been in the ground for 3 years. What is the best way to do it? So timing is a little bit different. In-ground grown tree locating of a citrus is harder to do than things that have been in containers. And the reason it's so hard is you need to make sure you're preserving the roots as much as possible. So you're going to be digging a much bigger hole, and depending on the type of soil, those roots could be much deeper. So it's just a matter of making sure you get a big enough hole that you're digging it out of and putting it back in. It's hard to do in-ground tree relocation, but being that's 3 years old, it just, I would move it late season after fruit because it is a stressful point on a tree whenever you're doing any type of actually replanting or transplanting like that. So there is a question that says, I have flowers on my Meyer currently and fear that I will lose them. So if we do have a big freeze come in, it could potentially cause those flowers to fall off. So if we do have any freeze come in, whether it's a flower or fruit, and you have the ability to cover that tree, I would recommend doing that to help protect it. That's a very good question. Let's see, I have a couple things that are in the Q&A. Let me make sure I get to them. So these. So this is a good example. So a tree, this is an interesting, so a tree was damaged by exposure to heat from a nearby fire, but opposite side fine. Should you prune? Just prune out the dead branches, those dead branches. That's going to be the best recommendation for that. Prune out the dead branches. It may not look the most exciting because depending on the extent of the damage, but anything dead or dying, it's going to be best to remove. All right. Well, that's it. I think we had a lot of good questions come in. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks again for everybody for making that quick change to moving online. We actually had a pretty good number of people come in today, despite that last minute change. So I'm going to send everybody that registered and attended, and then just through our listserv just to make sure that we're covered. I'm going to send everybody the links, the publications, and copies of the slides and how to get to the recording of this. So everything that you saw today, you will have access to, and I'll make sure it gets sent out to everybody. So thank you all very much, and thank you for attending. And please reach out to us, the Master Gardener Volunteers, the County Extension Office, for anything that you have, any questions, concerns, comments, anything with relating to your horticulture or your garden or any of the other programs that we have in our office. But anyways, you all take care. Thank you very much.